Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed who held the most influence without them saying a single word? It's not the loudest person, it's not the one seeking attention. It's the quiet one with undeniable presence. Their movements are calm. Their gaze is steady. They don't try to earn respect because the way they naturally commands it, and people instinctively step back. What makes someone like that? And more importantly, why aren't most of us like them? The truth is this: respect doesn't come from what you beg for, it comes from what you refuse to tolerate. It's not something you can force out of others. It's the natural result of deep self-awareness, clear boundaries, and the ability to walk away from anything that doesn't honor your worth. But to reach that state where you don't need to argue to prove yourself, don't need to lower yourself to be liked, and don't need to pretend to be accepted, you have to let some things go. Not your possessions, not your relationships, your habits. Habits that seem harmless but quietly erode your self-respect day by day. Habits that make people look down on you even when you're doing everything you can to please them. Habits that slowly make you lose your power in the eyes of others and worse, in your own. You might be kind, responsible, even successful, but if you still carry even one of these 7 habits, you'll always be living a smaller version of yourself, always trying, but rarely recognized for who you truly are. Stoic philosophy calls this silent self-betrayal, not because you're not good enough, but because you've forgotten that the way you treat yourself teaches others how to treat you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't dream of being liked. Live in a way that, whether people like you or not, you remain unshakable." In this video, we'll break down each toxic habit in depth, not to judge, but to awaken. So you can look at yourself with honesty and from there rebuild into the kind of person others don't dare to disrespect. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to chase love to feel worthy. All you need is to remove what's been dimming your true light. Starting now. Habit 1. Over-explaining. Have you ever noticed that the more confident a person is, the less they tend to speak? It's not because they're shy or withdrawn, it's because they don't feel the need to prove anything. On the other hand, people who lack confidence often feel compelled to explain every choice, every emotion, every move as if they're on trial. And that's the first trap that silently steals your respect: over-explaining. It might seem harmless. It might even come off as polite. But every time you explain yourself more than necessary, you're unconsciously sending a message: I'm not sure I'm right, and I need your approval to feel okay. In Stoic philosophy, over-explaining is seen as a symptom of weak inner discipline. Epictetus once taught, "He who knows what he's doing doesn't need to shout to be accepted," and he was right. Imagine you decline a party invitation because you need to rest. Someone asks, "Why aren't you coming?" Instead of simply saying, "I'm not feeling up to it," you start rambling. "I've been tired lately. Work's piling up. I've been feeling a little stressed. And I already went to the last one." Sound familiar? You think you're being transparent, but in reality, you're opening the door for people to cross your boundaries. The more reasons you give, the more ammunition they have to push back. It's just one night, can't you try? Everyone's tired, but they're still showing up. And suddenly you're on the defensive. You're put in a weaker position simply because you said too much. Strong people don't do that. They don't deliver speeches every time they make a decision. They say just enough and stand by it. No permission, no justification. Look at true symbols of power: world leaders, elite brands. Have you ever seen Rolls-Royce write a blog post explaining why their cars are expensive? No, they don't need to. They simply exist and the world respects them because of that quiet confidence. So why do you feel the need to justify your personal choices? If you decide to wake up at 5 a.m. to exercise and someone asks, "Why so early?" you don't need to deliver a TED talk about successful habits. Just say, "I like it." Short, firm, clear, strong enough to leave no room for debate. When you learn to speak less but with conviction, you're not only protecting your boundaries, you're radiating an energy that others don't dare challenge. On the flip side, the more you explain, the more you give others permission to question, interfere, or even dismiss you. And before you know it, you're no longer living to be respected, you're living to be accepted. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Let your actions speak for themselves. The fewer the words, the greater the weight." And that's something you should carry as a daily principle. Next time someone questions your decision, ask yourself, what would a strong person say right now? If the answer is less than, stop talking. You're not a lawyer defending your existence. You don't need to debate to be understood. You only need to be clear with yourself, and respect will follow. Habit 2. People pleasing. Here's a question that may seem simple, but if you answer it honestly, it could change the way you live. Have you ever said yes when deep down you really wanted to say no? If the answer is yes, you're not alone. And you're not wrong. Most of us were raised in a culture that glorifies likability, sacrifice, and being agreeable. We were taught that pleasing others is the pathway to being loved. That to be accepted, you must be kind, soft, and always available. But at some point you realize you're always available for everyone except yourself. You say yes to unnecessary meetings, to unreasonable requests, to draining conversations. And every time you do, you're pouring a little more energy out of yourself just to meet someone else's need. Stoicism calls this the loss of personal sovereignty. A Stoic doesn't live to please the world. They live in service of reason and personal values. They clearly distinguish between kindness rooted in strength and people-pleasing rooted in fear. You can't please everyone and still be yourself. Imagine you're at work. Your boss asks you to stay late even though you already have personal plans. Your mind kicks into familiar overdrive. If I say no, will I be seen as difficult? Will this hurt my chances at a promotion? So you nod, you say sure, while deep inside you're burning with frustration and disappointment in yourself. Pleasing others might win you temporary approval, but in the long run, it leads to being used, overlooked, and forgotten. Because people don't respect someone who's always available. They respect people who have boundaries. Remember this. You don't need to make everyone comfortable, you just need to live your truth. And sometimes that truth means letting people down. Yes, you heard that right. Let people be disappointed. Let them call you difficult. Let them walk away if they can't accept who you really are. Because anyone who leaves when you start setting boundaries never respected you in the first place. Take the woman who always puts her family first, always sacrifices, always says yes. Over time, people stop saying thank you. They stop asking and start expecting, until one day she says no. And suddenly she's called selfish. They say she's changed. But she didn't change. She just stopped letting herself be taken for granted. The truth is, the more agreeable you are, the more replaceable you become. The more you sacrifice, the more invisible you feel. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Do not let your soul become enslaved to the opinions of others simply because you're afraid to displease them." A short quote, but powerful enough to shake anyone who's living to meet expectations that aren't their own. Respect doesn't come when you say yes to everything. Respect comes when you can say no and still stand tall, guilt-free. Next time someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, ask yourself, if I say no, am I really losing someone, or am I finally keeping myself? Be kind. But don't be the person everyone throws their burdens on just because you won't say no. Kindness doesn't mean burning out. Generosity doesn't mean surrendering your limits. You weren't born to make others comfortable. You were born to become the strongest and most honest version of yourself. And when you live like that, respect doesn't need to be asked for. It shows up as a natural consequence. Habit 3. Validation seeking. There is a form of slavery that's very common today, but it doesn't involve chains, masters, or prisons. It's the dependence on how others see you. It's needing someone else to tell you you're good enough before you can feel at peace. It's letting others decide how you should feel about yourself. And the scary part is, most of us don't even realize we're living that way. You post a photo online. Within minutes, you check how many likes it has. Not as many as you hope. Suddenly, you feel uneasy. You say something smart in a meeting. No one responds, and you start wondering, was I being too much? You try a new style of clothing. But since no one compliments it, you decide never to wear it again. You're living like a piece of art that constantly needs an external judge to determine its worth. Stoic philosophy sees this as the ultimate loss of power, the power to define your own value. Epictetus once said, "If you rely on praise to feel good, then criticism will destroy you." And that's the biggest problem with living for validation. You hand the keys to your happiness to someone else. When they praise you, you're happy. When they stay silent, you start to doubt yourself. When they judge you, you fall apart. Worse, you start living to be accepted instead of living in truth. You choose careers not because they fit who you are, but because they look good to your parents, friends, or society. You enter relationships not because you feel something real, but because you want to prove to the world that you're desirable. You do everything for applause, and in the process, you abandon yourself. One of the clearest images of this habit is the child holding up a drawing to show their parents, hoping for praise. If they get a compliment, they smile. If ignored, they doubt the drawing. And soon they start doubting themselves. The problem is that child grows up, but the habit stays. Instead of holding a drawing, you now hold your career, your appearance, your lifestyle, and you run around asking people, "Am I okay? Do you like me? Am I good enough yet?" Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Stop living as if you were made to be a shadow of someone else. Live as your full self." Because the truth is, no one but you can tell you if you're enough. And if you don't believe in your own value, then no matter how loud the world applauds, you'll still feel empty. Imagine a tree growing in the middle of a field. The wind doesn't need to say you're allowed to grow for it to rise. The sun doesn't need to cheer for it to spread its branches. It grows because that's its nature, whether anyone sees it or not. You're the same. You don't need applause to live in alignment with your values. You only need one thing: inner clarity. When you know who you are, what you need, and why you choose the way you do, then every compliment, insult, silence, or judgment from the world becomes secondary. The only validation you truly need is the look in your own eyes when you face the mirror each morning and say, "I know who I am, and I respect that person." Remember, you don't need the applause. You don't need the compliments. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Because the moment you stop living for validation is the moment you start living like someone no one dares to disrespect. Habit 4. Comparison. If there's one simple formula for destroying your confidence, choking your gratitude, and poisoning your joy, it's this: comparing yourself to others. You know the feeling well. You're feeling fine about your life until you see a post. A friend just bought a house. Someone you barely know just got promoted. A stranger is showing off an expensive vacation with their ideal partner. Suddenly, you look at your own life and it feels painfully ordinary. Worse, you start to doubt the things that once felt meaningful. The job you were once proud of now seems not enough. The partner you used to be grateful for suddenly seems less attractive. The whole journey you've been building starts to feel small. All because you look sideways. Stoicism sees comparison as a betrayal of the soul. Not a betrayal of others, but a betrayal of your own path. Seneca once wrote, "No one can live happily if they are constantly measuring their life against someone else's." Because every time you look up to measure your height, you forget you're standing on a different road, heading toward a different mountain in a different season of life. Imagine a long-distance runner. If he keeps turning his head to check where others are, he'll lose his rhythm, lose his balance, and lose himself on the track. That's exactly what happens when you live through comparison. You stop to watch others move forward. And the worst part, you never know the full story behind what you're seeing. Social media doesn't show you the original. It shows you the edited version. It shows you the success, not the sleepless nights. The smile, not the confusion behind the scenes. But even knowing that, you still let your heart be manipulated by the illusion of perfect lives. And so, you start to feel not enough. You see someone's great body and forget you once overcame depression. You see someone's perfect family and forget you once walked away from a toxic relationship to save yourself. You see someone's promotion and forget you once had the courage to quit a hollow job to pursue something more alive. You're not behind. You're simply living a different life. Marcus Aurelius once reminded, don't waste time wishing you were someone else. Use every moment to live as your true self, because that's the one thing you can do better than anyone. Just look at nature. Every tree blooms in its own season. Every river has its own course. The sun doesn't envy the moon. The eagle doesn't wish it could swim like a fish. And neither should you. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to become the fullest version of yourself. Because greatness doesn't come from being like others. Greatness comes when you dare to be different unapologetically. Every time you compare, you dull your own uniqueness. You shrink yourself to fit into a mold that was never made for you. And in the end, you become a blurry version of someone else instead of a legend on your own path. So next time you feel like you're falling behind or not enough, ask yourself, who set this standard? And why am I living by it? Then take a deep breath. Look at your path and keep walking. Not because someone is watching, not because someone is clapping, but because you know the mountain you're climbing is exactly where you belong. Habit 5. Tolerating disrespect. Not everyone disrespects you by yelling, insulting, or being blatantly rude. Sometimes it's more subtle: a raised eyebrow, a cutting joke, an interruption during a meeting, a message left unanswered, or a blank stare while you're speaking. And the saddest part, you've gotten used to it. You laugh it off and call it no big deal. You stay quiet, thinking it's a sign of maturity. But the truth is, you're allowing others to diminish you little by little. Stoic philosophy teaches we cannot control how others treat us, but we can control what we allow. And that's the point. No one disrespects you without your permission. Every time you let someone dismiss your words and say nothing, every time you're given extra work without recognition, and you quietly accept it, every time you're treated as a backup plan and you keep giving, you're teaching people that this behavior is okay. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The wicked cannot harm me unless I allow it to enter my soul." Respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you command through the boundaries you set. Think of a lion. It doesn't need to roar for everyone to know it rules. Even lying silently, no one dares to cross its territory. Not because it's aggressive, but because it never allows itself to be treated like a house cat. So what about you? Are you wearing the mask of being easygoing, agreeable, and low maintenance, only to end up taken advantage of, overlooked, and disrespected? Look at your workplace. How many times have you been interrupted while presenting an idea? How often do coworkers get the credit while you get ignored? How often do you stay quiet out of fear of being labeled difficult? Your silence isn't humility. It's a permission slip for others to walk over you. You don't have to yell or get angry. Stoics don't operate that way, but they know when to rise, when to walk away, and when to say, "I don't accept this." You should too. In friendships, if you're always the one listening, always available, but they only come to unload their emotions, that's not a relationship. That's exploitation. In love, if you're constantly waiting for a text, forgiving indifference, tolerating vagueness, that's not love. That's fear of abandonment disguised as understanding. Don't confuse patience with self-neglect, emotional maturity with lack of boundaries. You weren't born to be someone's emotional doormat. You were born to stand tall with your self-worth intact. Seneca once said, "See yourself as a temple. Those who enter must remove their shoes. If they don't honor the sacredness, they don't deserve to be there." So next time someone disrespects you, whether through sarcasm, thoughtlessness, or silent dismissal, you have two choices. Smile politely and keep being overlooked. Or stand firm, stay calm, and say, "I don't allow that." No anger needed, just clarity. Because the person afraid of losing others will eventually lose themselves. But the person who knows their worth never has to beg for respect. Others will either offer it freely or quietly walk away. Habit 6. Fear of being disliked. Among all the quiet fears that control people every day, one of the most dangerous and least admitted is this: the fear of being disliked. It doesn't scream. It doesn't knock loudly. It just whispers in your ear every time you're about to speak your mind. Don't say that they'll think you're negative. Don't say no, they'll hate you. Don't stand out too much, you'll be left out. So you stay silent. You nod when you don't agree. You smile when you're hurt. You say yes to things you don't want just to keep the peace. It might seem smart or easy to get along with, but in reality, you're slowly erasing yourself to fit into other people's expectations. Stoics call this self-erasure, when the way you look in other people's eyes matters more than who you truly are. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you try to please everyone, you'll lose yourself, and then no one will even know who you are." Think about it. How many times have you held back from posting something you deeply believe just to avoid being judged? How many times have you hidden your real personality, your passions, your path just to fit in? How many times have you left a room and sighed because you just played a role instead of being yourself? The truth is, the desire to be liked makes you easy to manipulate. Because when you need people to like you, you'll do anything to avoid conflict, avoid seeming difficult, avoid letting others down. And that turns you into someone who changes based on who's in the room. You walk in and adjust your energy. You change your tone to match the crowd. You're not even sure who the real you is anymore because you've worn the mask of likability for too long. Remember, when you live to be liked by everyone, you won't be respected by anyone. Because respect doesn't come from being soft and agreeable. Respect comes from being yourself, even when no one claps for it. Look at those remembered in history, from Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, to modern reformers. They didn't live to please the crowd. Many were disliked, misunderstood, even attacked. But they never bowed because they understood. Being liked is a feeling. Being respected is a principle. Feelings change, but principles make you unforgettable. You don't need everyone to like you. You just need the courage to accept that some people won't, and that's perfectly okay. Seneca once said, "Not everyone deserves for you to bend yourself just to please them." A simple sentence, but one that can free you from a lifetime of chasing approval. So next time you hesitate out of fear of upsetting someone, stop and ask yourself, am I living by my values or chasing temporary approval? If you choose values, you might be disliked, but you'll be respected. And more importantly, you'll respect yourself. Because you weren't born to be the watered-down version of yourself that's easy for others to swallow. You were born to live your full truth, whether anyone approves or not. Habit 7. Losing personal purpose. There's a quiet tragedy happening in modern life. It doesn't make you cry out loud, but it leaves you feeling hollow every morning when you wake up. It's not a sudden loss, not an accident. It's the slow erosion of your own sense of purpose. You wake up, work, meet expectations, check off tasks, reply to messages, show up to meetings, accept invitations you don't care about. Everything looks fine. But inside, you're slowly becoming a hollow shell because you've forgotten why you started. You traded purpose for productivity. You traded passion for stability. You traded personal meaning for being seen as reliable, hardworking, and easy to like. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, who am I really living for? Where am I actually headed? And all the things I'm doing, do they even belong to me? Stoic philosophy views a life without purpose as a form of wasted existence. Epictetus once warned, there is nothing more tragic than a person who has all the means to live greatly but chooses to live by habit. And that's what's happening. You chose a career to meet your parents' expectations. You chose a partner based on what society approves. You built a life like a safe script only to reach a point where everything is settled, and yet, you no longer recognize who you are. Because when you live without a personal sense of purpose, it's easy to fall into the trap of being busy, but empty. You become skilled at things your heart no longer connects to. You may be successful in the eyes of the world, but failing in the deepest parts of yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Do what you need to do as if it were the last thing you'll ever do. Not to rush, but to live with clarity, with presence, and with the weight of what your choices actually mean." You don't need some grand life mission to have purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be a bold slogan. It just needs to be something that makes you feel you're living right. Something that helps you know today isn't just a repeat of yesterday. You're moving, step by step, toward what your heart truly calls for. When you lose your sense of purpose, you begin living for others. You let the outside world define success, happiness, worth, and even your right to rest. And eventually you'll realize the world's approval can never replace the feeling of being lost within yourself. That's why the Stoics began each day with a single question. What am I living for today? Not to please others, but to stay honest with their own soul. Imagine you're a sculptor. If every day you stare at someone else's statue, envy their talent, copy their form, you'll never complete your own. You'll stay unfinished. And at the end of your life, all you'll have is a flawed replica instead of a masterpiece that was yours alone. But if you focus on carving your own stone line by line, shape by shape, even slowly, even imperfectly, even without applause, you'll create something no one else can. That is a life with purpose. That is you living authentically. Remember, people with a clear purpose are not easily controlled. They're not easily disrespected. They know who they are, what they need, and no longer crave applause to validate their path. They live like mountains, rising tall without needing to be seen, moving upward even when no one agrees. You've just walked through 7 habits that may seem harmless but secretly erode your self-respect day after day. Each one is a link in a chain, and when worn long enough, you forget who you are. You start living by expectation, acting out of habit, reacting from fear, and one day you look back at your life and can't find yourself in it anymore. Respect doesn't come from appearances. It doesn't come from titles. It doesn't come from charming words. Respect comes from the strength you show in your choices, the boundaries you set, and the values you refuse to compromise. The Stoics never chased respect. They lived by reason, by principles, by inner purpose, and respect naturally followed when others encountered that unshakable presence. You can live like that too. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to posture to be admired. You don't need to pretend to be loved. All you need is to remove the habits that shrink you. To start living like someone with sovereignty, with clear boundaries, with purpose and the courage to uphold it. And when you do that, you don't just reclaim the respect of others. You reclaim the respect of yourself. Remember this. You don't have to compromise to stay. You don't have to prove yourself to be accepted. You don't need permission to be who you truly are. You only need to decide that starting today, you will no longer trade your dignity for temporary approval. Stand up not to prove anything, but to return to the powerful self you were always meant to be. Live as if the world is watching, but you don't need its applause. Because real respect never starts in the eyes of others. It begins with how you see yourself.